Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to a new episode of the Daily World News Commentary. As usual, I handpicked the most important news of the last 24 hours. So, if you have no clue what have changed in the world today, I'm here to fill you in. I'll make a first segment of every episode from now on about reviewing the Syrian map to see the most important developments, to the most important war of our lifetime possibly, and it is something that will shape the events of the world for decades to come, and of course for millions of displaced Syrians. So we're gonna back up real quick, and this is Syria. The red is the areas controlled by the regime of Bashar al-Assad, and the green is the areas controlled by the various rebel groups. The OPCW experts are collecting evidence in this area, and we're going to be talking about it. This is Doma. This is where the latest infamous chemical attack happened. You've got a variety of things happening here in terms of fighting ISIS, but it's what I really wanted to highlight is right here. We were seeing here a lot of action that was about to happen, and it basically ended in the surrender of most of the rebels. So it seems like a lot of them are going to be moving, a lot of them are having talks, while here we see strikes targeting agriculture lands, and this guy right here is someone who is on the ground, who is documenting what the Russian airstrikes are doing in the area. So anyway, moving on to Spain. Actually, maybe I should. Yeah, I think no, nothing else really. There were some other small minor incidents, but there really is nothing of major development. That's all I wanted to say about what's happening in Syria. So anyway, we go to Spain, where there's important news. The terrorist group ETA announced its disbandment over a theatrical recording that was, as you can see in it was viewed all over on national TV. They also said that they will cease all political activity and basically cease to exist. Of course, the Prime Minister came out and said that ETA is not off the hooks, and that its members will be brought to justice. So they already launched investigations, and they're going to be trying to get them. In Pakistan, the army's chief of staff today said that Pakistan's military wants peace and dialogue with India. This comes after having invited the Indian military attaché and his staff to attend a military parade in capital last month. And of course, there is the joint military action. These guys are going to get together in Russia in September. So I'm optimistic. I would say, you would wonder why, because, well, it would end one of the major conflicts in the world between two nuclear powers, and it will enhance trade and cooperation that will make the area blossom and becomes less susceptible to terrorism. At least I hope so. In Afghanistan, various ethnic groups are upset because the national ID that was issued today for enabling the Afghans to participate in the upcoming elections has nationality written on it as Afghan. You might wonder what's the big deal, but as it turns out, locally, Afghan is the dominant ethnic groups. The Pashtuns are used to be denoted as such as Afghans as well, like I guess sometimes Pashtuns or sometimes Afghan. So other ethnic groups see this designation as a way of for the Pashtuns, among them the president himself, to entrench the power that they have been holding onto. I'm not sure how to overcome this dilemma. So if the ID carrier's ethnic group is written on the ID, it would make it much easier to target specific ethnic groups, right? On the other hand, the traditional name given for the people of this nation is the same as the name of one of their most powerful ethnic groups. That's a tough one. Hard to say. In related news, Iran's ambassador to Afghanistan Iran's ambassador to ambassador to Afghanistan said that Iran has shared information about ISIS with Afghanistan regarding ISIS's infiltration into Afghanistan. This is probably in response to the recent Kabul attack that was one of the bloodiest day in history for journalism. In Sri Lanka, the president's chief of staff was arrested along with another state's official today while accepting a bribe in a parking lot of a luxury hotel in the capital, while they were accepting 20 million rupees, which roughly equates to 126,863 USD. I'm honestly impressed, Sri Lanka. You'll be just fine. On a smaller scale, there was a similar story in Malawi where the former president of the country returned after 4 years of self-exiling herself, only to be arrested and investigated by Malawi's anti-corruption agency upon her arrival in relation to what is called the Cashgate scandal, in which a lot of officials were accused of funneling millions of dollars of public money. If you're wondering where is Malawi, I was wondering the same thing. So Malawi is right here. Right in is this small strip of land right there between Zimbabwe and Tanzania and Mozambique. Just FYI. Alright, so speaking of investigations and important anticipated investigations, the alleged chemical attack in Syria. So the inspectors of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, are going to exhume the bodies of the victims of the attack. You might wonder, how do they know if there are any victims if they are investigating that an attack have occurred in the first place? The thing is, the city was being targeted by the Assad's regime around the same time of the chemical attack using airstrikes. So if I'm understanding correctly, they will be examining the bodies of the people who died that day at that location to see if they have any traces of chemical agents, or if they just died happily with the good old-fashioned barrel bombs, which is also by the way a pretty horrific death, or maybe something less exotic like a regular rocket that just splashes civilians into pieces in an instant. As long as there was no chemical agents used, then the world will be able to breathe again. In Geneva today, the UN humanitarian advisor for Syria gave a horrific picture of the effects of the Syrian war in just this last year. In a news conference, Jan Egeland said, "We look back 1 year ago, there were 4.6 million people living in hard-to-reach areas and 625,000 people in besieged areas. However, he then proceeds to say, but today 2 million live in hard to reach areas. So like compared to 4.6, it became 2, and 11,000 people live in the besieged areas. So 11,000 instead of the 625,000 that used to live there. Wow, right? In Europe, the EU has set its budget for 2021 to 2027 at 1,135 billion euros. It will include new mechanisms to protect against financial risk that could rise from the variation of different legal systems within each member that exists within each member country. It will also include a new mechanism called rule of law mechanism, which means members would lose EU funding if there is a misalignment between their national laws and EU laws. This law mechanism is very controversial, as it raises the question: is the EU a set of sovereign states that are cooperating with each other, or is it more like a federation that rules centrally over a number of regions? I think that the countries paying the biggest bills and have the biggest influence, like Germany and France, think that this is a federation, while the Eastern Bloc of the EU prefers the sovereign states' way of doing things. Poland, for example, is unified in its rejection of Muslim immigrants, and they are ready to stand up for their right to determine who enters their lands and live among them. Another problem related to the budget is that there is a gap in it because of Brexit. So the EU Commissioner is saying it will be filled with a combination of cuts and more money from member states. The current budget constitutes 1% of EU's budget, which equates roughly to the cost of 1 cup of coffee from each citizen. From each citizen of an EU member state. And there's also the issue of Poland that is pretty hard-headed on the migration issue. And it seems like Poland, according to the new changes to the budget, Poland is going to be getting less money, and if it insists on its stance. Some experts estimate it to be somewhere between 8 to 10 billion euros less. In related news to the EU, in a press conference was held by the EU delegation in Nigeria, where it was announced that the EU managed to facilitate the safe return of 7,720 Nigerians who were in Libya attempting to cross to Europe illegally, yet they voluntarily accepted the opportunity to be sent back to their hometowns. So this is an example of the efforts the EU is putting in order to do something about the migration crisis. Kudos to them. In Israel, a report by a highly credible news, Ma'arif, an Israeli newspaper, said that the Palestinian Authority's security forces in the West Bank have stopped 40% of all planned resistance violent attacks against Israeli occupation forces. Now, I'm not calling the Israeli forces in the West Bank an occupation force out of spite. Nope. Israel itself considers the West Bank an occupied land. It controls it militarily, but does not provide services to it, and does not believe itself to have any obligations towards that area or that territory. The irony is that the Palestinian leader, who just got re-elected as the chairman of the PLO, just questioned the Holocaust a couple of days ago, and that the Jews were to blame for, he says the Jews are to blame for their own fate. Anyway, he's the same guy overseeing the security apparatus that is preventing what I would consider resistance in the occupied West Bank. Anyway, he has no choice though. He wouldn't exist if he did not do his job well in resorting only to peaceful measures and in securing Israel from the West Bank's resistance movements. Of course, as long as Israel is comfortable with the situation in the West Bank, nothing will change, and nothing will have changed in the last 30 years because of that. In Turkey, 70 soldiers. Oh, by the way, like in case someone would assume that I'm saying it raises the question: Am I considering what's happening in the West Bank in terms of resistance a form of terrorism or no? That's a really good question. Well, see, if it is an occupied land, you are given the opportunity to defend yourself. That's how I see it. I would feel, of course, that if someone can argue otherwise, I would welcome their opinion and I would be very interested in understanding it. But my understanding of it, like even from the point of as much of fairness as possible from an international law's point of view, is it okay to kill members of a state's army that is based on the international law, occupies your land, right? So anyway, in Turkey, soldiers, that's the Palestinian leader who just said some anti-Semitic stuff. In Turkey, 70 soldiers were arrested. Some were on active duty due to suspicions that they were linked to the Golan movement. This is, of course, a recurrence, as the judiciary have been issuing such warrants for some time right now. How much of a threat is the Turkish stability under, and is it really justified to issue so many warrants in such a purging way? Well, Turkey has a lot of challenges to deal with, and the Turkish military is a very complex institution that no one knows much about. These arrests occur amid a 10.85% inflation in April year on year, according to the Turkish Statistical Institute, Turkstat, announced today. Yet the interest rate continues to remain low. So if we look at some of the charts here, we will see interest rate and inflation. As we see the red right there is the inflation. It's going up, yet the interest rate continues to remain low. And my understanding is the interest rate needs to be going up when the inflation is up. That's the traditional thing to happen. You have to increase the interest rate when the inflation is so fast like this, because you want people to save, and so the prices go down a little bit. But anyway, so that's one thing to note. And then another one is right here we see the foreign reserve is declining. It's the blue, it's the yellow, right? It's declining. The of course the blue, right, light blue right here is its percentage to the GDP. So both of them are declining. And then we got right here the credit. The credit is huge, is least to say, right? So I think one of them is the private sector, and then the GDP is in the green. So the GDP has been going up pretty fast, right? Like compared to like this area right here, you see consistent solid increase, which amounts to about 11% increase for the last pretty much 6 years on average. But it comes at the cost of huge spikes of credit, huge, and it's been consistently going down, but it's still pretty high. So I would say, given all that I said about the general state of the economy, it indicates a possible sign of an overheated economy where an imbalance could kick any time. So like we can see right there the current account balance. Will you look at that? Among the emerging economies, Turkey has the most worrisome account deficit to GDP ratio. So anyway, in Venezuela, the government arrests 11 top executives from the country's biggest private bank and takes over the bank for 90 days to clean up the alleged illicit behavior that it claims is what's behind the economic crisis that it is currently going through. Interesting move. That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Please like and subscribe, and tune in tomorrow for more news that I will gather for you every day, just to keep you informed, real quick, real fast, to the point. Yeah, I hope you let me know, give me feedback of what you think, and peace out.